We're chatting until we're chatting.
We're chatting until we chat.
We're chatting until we chat. Beautiful, independent Myra. Yeah, I planned.
Stunning. Radiant.
Oh, God. We can't start with the more than one compliment in the beginning because it's so much.
I will say resplendent, Mia.
Resplendent.
Resplendent.
I like it. Welcome back to Gilded Eye Podcast, by the way.
By the BT Dubs.
Today, I want to open the show by talking about Ophelia by John Everett Millais. Fave. You recognize this painting?
Oh, very much so. I have a tote bag with her likeness on it.
Oh, I want that. I want a bed sheet.
Nice.
I want a shower curtain.
I want to be that.
I want to be... This is how I feel when I fall asleep at night.
Yeah, that's how I look in the bath.
Oh my God, yeah. I think that this painting... By the way, so this painting that Millais made, it showcases the iconic offstage death of Ophelia, a character in Shakespeare's Hamlet that is driven to madness and grief, who eventually drowns in a river under ambiguous circumstances. Ambiguous. Her story echoes in the life of the woman that we're going to be discussing today, Elizabeth Siddal, the muse of many Pre-Raphaelite artworks and the model behind this iconic painting. Have you ever heard of Elizabeth Siddal?
I have not heard of Elizabeth Siddal. I heard that this was his wife in the bath.
Wrong.
They fibbed.
They so fibbed. Well, she was sort of like the muse wife of all of the Pre-Raphaelite bros, because it is like a frat. It's like
it does seem quite frat-esque, and all of their paintings, I'm like, that looks like mostly the same.
Well, they
beautiful
loved
white lady
redheads.
They did.
They like only painted redheads, and they all look very much the same.
They made a frat based on their fetish. It seems.
Yeah, it was very interesting. But she was sort of like the it girl. She was that girl.
She was her.
Like, when I was planning this episode first, I kind of just wanted to focus on the imagery and symbolism of sleeping or unconscious women, like throughout art history and even like in modern day.
Right.
Because I feel like Ophelia-esque imagery, it's something that's still trending. Like, I'm seeing modern recreations of Ophelia all the time.
Absolutely.
And like, I've done my own little like riffs of it just because I think it's easy to relate to that feeling of being overwhelmed by one's nature, you could say. Because in this image, she's literally being overwhelmed by nature.
Being consumed by it, yeah.
And so I think that it's a statement on like being overwhelmed by one's mind and one's way of being as well. So I think that it's easy to relate to it. But I do think that the context and history of the making of this painting, as well as the life of the model, can give it a little sinister edge. I want to take you back in time. We're blasting off.
Today?
We are going to the lovely 1849 London.
Ooh.
It's awful. It's probably the worst place that we could
smell it already.
It's so bad. It's the Victorian era. It absolutely reeks of tobacco, horses, and sewage because at this point in time, they have not nailed down effective plumbing.
Yet.
You know, the River Thames was just suffering for it. They were throwing all that right into the Thames. So R.I.P. It was
poop.
It was a completely overpopulated and overall entirely miserable place to be. You want to go? Are we going? Field trip?
Yeah. I'm getting on the bus.
The bus.
The bus. I'm picturing the magic school bus pulling up to take us to 1849 London.
Oh, regardless of how miserable it is, our story begins in a dressmaker sort of accessory shop. So in my brain, despite the previous description of where we are, it's like Howl's Moving Castle in my brain. The scene of like Sophie in the hat making shop, like she's making hats and it's all like bright and there's like, it's nice and there's fun banners outside. It's colorful and
it's like vibrant and
yeah. So that's what's going on in my brain because I can't think about the other alternative for very long without being
We're
grossed
isolating
out.
ourselves from the vial.
Yeah, I hate it. Our girl, Elizabeth, nicknamed Lizzie, is working as a dressmaker's assistant, otherwise called a milliner. She's like that's the word, I guess. I could be saying it wrong.
I think that is the
milliner's assistant.
I see.
And she is either 15, she's between 15 or 20 years old. Every source
young and spry.
Young and spry. Every source I read gave her a different age, so she's like within that range. Her father worked as a watchmaker, and her family was overall relatively impoverished. They weren't so like in the only the super rich Victorian castle people were above the waist of the Thames, basically. So her family was like right in there, you know, which made her discovery as a model all the more exciting. So how did she get discovered, I wonder? Walter Deverell is an artist at the time, and he is frequenting this little shop for some reason. A lot.
He likes gowns, it seems.
He loves a gown. And he is admiring Elizabeth from far, which could be really creepy if she's 15.
Not at all unsettling.
Yeah, but he like spots her and is like very much intrigued by her, and he like kind of adopts her into this group of Pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, which we'll talk about in a second. And she becomes a model for all of their artworks. Now, Lizzie, has either been described as this like otherworldly being full of divine beauty that nobody can contest, or super boring and like ugly. So I think that this probably just means she's just a girl, you know? Like she's just a woman.
That's just like the spectrum of girlhood.
It's girlhood. So she's probably just literally like a 17-year-old being like, Hi. I have red hair. Like, that really did it for them. They were like, oh my God. Say less. Specifically, she was described as having auburn brown hair that glowed in the sun, a, quote, small and well-shaped head.
I mean, yeah. Obsessed. I wonder how they measure that.
I'm perfect for art. I don't know. But Walter's his verbatim account to his besties in the Pre-Raphaelite frat that he's like, part of.
Let me tell you.
He says, you fellows can't tell what a stupendously beautiful creature I have found, with gray eyes and her hair shimmering with luster as she waves it down. She's like,
creature.
She's just a girl. Yeah. So like, I can imagine him like, so jolly. Like,
I'm picturing him like clicking his heels as he describes this woman or girl to his bros.
You will not believe what I found. So let's talk about the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood real quick.
Good touch.
They are, this group primarily consists of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who's one of the major players in this story, John Everett Millais, who we've already kind of discussed. He's the artist behind Ophelia and a lot of other masterworks. Millais was considered like the guy. He's the guy. He's like the face of, he's the most talented of them all.
He's the most
face
well-known.
of the movement.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that he's kind of objectively the most skilled, in my opinion. I don't know. I love his work so much.
His work is phenomenal.
Yeah. And then William Holman Hunt as well. So in Millais' mother's house, I don't know if they were in the attic or the basement or where they were, but this group of young men decided to band together to reform English art. They were like, it's up to us. They were dire.
Like, guys, it sucks. Guys, we have to do something.
We got to get in here somehow. So they took a lot of inspiration from pre-Renaissance Italian paintings, like religious imagery, symbolism. What's the word that you were using a lot?
Iconography.
What's the allegory?
Allegory.
Yeah. So they were using a lot of that, but they were kind of twisting it, flipping and reversing it to be really focused on like studying from life while they were painting, like taking reference directly from life and nature. They really wanted to bring nature back into paintings, which is like such a definitive theme and visual motif in the Ophelia painting as well. It really like stuck out for that reason. Yeah. Elizabeth is their token model. She's taken into the basement or wherever they were in his mom's house. And they're like, oh my God, she's the one. So they all start painting and drawing her. Specifically, Dante takes an interest in Lizzie, and it's sort of quickly known, like, okay, that's his model. We all paint and draw from her, but
she's owned.
Basically.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So, and not only did he like paint from her and use her as a model, but he was giving her art lessons as well, because she had expressed interest in learning the trade. Lizzie herself was pretty proficient in drawing and painting at the time. So she sort of was depicting the same or similar stories that were in the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood paintings as well, but she took a different approach. So for example, in her drawing Lady of Shalott, it's based off the Tennyson poem about another woman who's like driven to madness and dies in a lake, which like seems to happen all the time.
They're big fans of that narrative, it seems.
A lot of the men in her circle at this time chose to only depict the end, like where it's this climax of emotion and madness and like she's crazy and she's dying or whatever. And Elizabeth chooses to depict her at the beginning of the story, like on her loom, looking out the window. It sort of has a little bit more potential. A lot of her imagery is more powerful if you look at it through the lens of self-portraiture. Because
absolutely.
Yeah, like there are lots of interiors. She often portrays women in like moments of crisis with windows or doors nearby. It's typically always an interior. So I think that this is maybe an ode to her life, like trying to fit in to a world that doesn't really accept or take her seriously.
Sort of seeking that reprieve.
Yeah. And she's very talented, I think.
I never even knew that she was an artist as well.
Yeah, she was.
That's crazy.
In a lot of sources, it described it as being a pale echo of Dante's work.
A pale echo.
Those are the words.
Wow.
Yeah, pale echo. And I think that a lot of it is because she didn't have as much technical practice. She wasn't granted the amount of like resources as other artists in her time. And also like she's like obviously a woman in that time period. She did have her own patron named John Ruskin. They're always named John. Whenever I like don't know the first name, it's always John. So yeah, John Ruskin, he was a famous art critic and he was an avid supporter of the Pre-Raphaelites. He discovered Lizzie and her art and like was so obsessed with it that he offered her a yearly stipend in exchange for her to like make work.
That sounds awesome.
It sounds really great.
All the time. Wow, for you.
Oh, please do that for me. Can you become a rich art curator and so that you can like...
I would love to do that.
You can support me.
Hey guys, come to the Mia show.
That'd be really good.
It would be beyond slay.
It would sell. It would sell. Oh, I need money. Okay, anyway, so so it sounds really nice. It sounds like a good situation, except at least in my opinion, when I was reading, it seems like every supporter or like person within this group kind of had the same approach to Lizzie's art where they're like, we love you, you're so cute. Like, keep making art. Almost like she's a mascot of their movement. And they're like, isn't it so cute?
Oh, look. Oh, she's trying. Guys, she's drawing.
Yeah, it wasn't
like infantilizing.
They never really referred to her work also as like anything other than a design. So like where we might talk about someone's work and be like, oh, what a drawing, a painting. Like they would just call it designs, which is like
otherize her work from their own, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they supported her to like a condescending level. And John Ruskin was kind of one of those people. Even though he was supporting her directly and giving her time and space, he was also giving her unsolicited advice all the time about like her life choices and her art choices. And eventually Lizzie was sort of sick of it and she started refusing his payments because she recognized that his support was not patronage but charity. There is an idea that Ruskin might have just been trying to flatter Dante by complimenting and supporting his pupil. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about Dante.
Oh, look at that guy.
He's got a big head.
Side part.
Side part. Dante Gabriel Rossetti was the son of an Italian poet named Gabriel who had been exiled from Naples for writing political poetry that rubbed many the wrong way. Could be an episode all on its own, but I'll just leave it at that. He and all of his siblings were proficient in poetry, writing, art making, visual stuff. And Dante himself sort of straddled the line between being a visual artist or a poet. So he was
one toe in each pond.
One cheek in each
toilet.
As we said before, Dante, he liked Lizzie. He
Very
nicknamed.
fond.
Do you want to know his nickname for her?
Do I?
Can you guess? You're not going to guess, but try.
Little Red or something.
Little Red.
Sexy Red?
It was Googums.
There is no way on earth I ever could have guessed that.
Which is like, okay.
What is that? Oh, wait. Come again, please.
So, Googums. I don't know. I hate saying it. I don't. And other people, like his brother, Dante's brother, when referring to like Dante and Elizabeth's relationship, he would be like, yeah, him and his Googums were like, other people are using the nickname.
It's like his Pookie.
Yeah, it was Pookie of the time.
Pookie of the time. That sounds like you have a cat and that cat did something cute and you're like, aw, little Googums.
Oh, that's like actually so wretched.
It's a touch vile.
Yeah, so yeah, Dante loved his Googums. Oh. I will not be calling her that anymore because she has a name. He sort of had this weird possessiveness over her. Like other people were drawing from her too, but like she and Dante had this really weird emotional attachment to each other. They were obviously interested in sort of courting each other, but they were never formally betrothed, which was odd because typically like it's 1849. Betrothal is like very common. Like you meet someone and you like them and you're like, oh, marry me now.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
But why couldn't he do that? And also, do we know that her affections were reciprocated? Like, was she about that side part?
So I think that she was actually more emotionally dependent on him than he was of her. Like, he definitely had like a possessiveness for her, but it wasn't enough for him to propose, and it wasn't enough to stop him from like pursuing other women. Like he often had like affairs. But she was, if we look back to her artwork, which depicts sort of like women trapped in places, she was sort of stuck without many lifelines. Like she didn't have a big support system. She was sort of only around this one artist who she really wanted to like keep ties with because it was her livelihood. She, I think, had a lot of stakes in the game. Like she really loved him and wanted to pursue something, and he was like hesitant about it. So in 1858, their relationship, or situationship, I should say.
They had a 19th century situationship.
Yeah, I guess. Except they never consummated. I don't know what a situationship back then could really mean if they weren't boinking. So
yearning. They were just like, they had eye contact.
That's actually so real. They brushed pinkies one time.
Oh my God.
And then he like dated someone else, and she was like, we had something.
And
what are
right.
we? Yeah, she's right. Yeah, she's not wrong. So 1858, they had this like big falling out. The situationship came to a head. They didn't talk for like 2 years.
9-year situationship they had.
It's like crazy. That's so
insane.
long. Yeah, and with no ring. No ring.
I would kill him. Literally prison.
Oh my God. So actually, after they kind of broke it off, Lizzie was like doing kind of fine. Like she moved to a different town. She went to the art school there for like 2 years. She was kind of getting hers. Like she was able to do so. And this would have been all fine and dandy. I think she could have like done this, except another huge part of her character is that she was often very, very sickly. She was always described as like super frail, super sickly, not one for this plane. You know what I mean? She couldn't really hold a cast iron pan. Neither can I, but that's just because I don't go to the gym as much as I probably should. So much of the artwork of this time, like depicting Lizzie, have her looking very ghostly.
She does.
Ghastly.
She's very gaunt.
Yeah, gaunt, sickly.
Yes.
Dante especially loved to kind of exaggerate the sickly, gaunt elements of her character.
He was about that, yeah.
He was about that life. And lots of people in the circle sort of describe her, the more sick and weak that she was, the more beautiful that she was. Which is... Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But yeah, it's not... It doesn't bode well that the healthier and more like fully herself she was, the less that people enjoyed her.
They're like, what?
Yeah, hopes and dreams.
You're not
or
just
whatever.
an extension of us?
Yeah, exactly.
How dare you? Go become frail.
God, it's like that old Tumblr poem where it's like, I have glass bones and paper skin.
From SpongeBob?
Is that from SpongeBob?
Yeah. I've got glass bones and paper skin. Every morning I break my arms and every evening I break my legs.
That's
Every moment I am in agony. Or something like that.
That's so profound, though. Like, how is that SpongeBob?
Oh my gosh, we have to have a SpongeBob marathon, I fear.
We should talk about the artist from SpongeBob.
I would love to do that,
All
actually.
right, writing it, it's going on the list. After art school, she gets sick. And her parents are freaking out because they also are very hands-off. They're like, oh, we have to deal with you again. My God, we're too busy for you right now. They're kind of like over it, and they call Ruskin. They call our good art critic friend Ruskin for some reason. Bestie Ruskin. Probably because they knew that he was funding her.
He was like, hey, money.
He was like, actually, this is a little bit too high maintenance for me. I'm going to call Dante, and he's going to take care of it. So finally, Dante knows that she's like ill and dying. And maybe it was like an impulse decision or whatever, but it's this very pivotal scene where he drops the hose and chooses Lizzie. And
he's like, oh, you're on your deathbed? Yeah.
Yeah. But I also think he did this like for the aesthetic almost, because that's very his character. Is he sort of like, I'm going to do all this stuff so that history will remember me in a certain way. Like, so I can't be seen as the guy as like who won't like nurse my dead girlfriend like back to life. Like he needed that for his character development.
For it to be in the history books, it seems.
Yeah. So he decides to go back to her, and they like reconnect. And 2 years after this, in 1860, they get married.
My jaw just dropped for those who can't see my face.
They get married after like a billion years of courting. They get married, which is like seems super fun.
I feel like I'd be bored at that point. To get married after all that time, I'd be like, took you long enough.
Also, she's like sick. Also, if that were me, I'd be like, can you ask me when I'm like
healthy,
conscious? Yeah, crazy. And this event was quoted in the articles that I was reading as it was perceived by historians as one of the last hopeless events in the tragic life of Elizabeth Siddal. So, doesn't that make your stomach just kind of drop out of your body?
I think it's
like not fun.
That's so sad.
I know. And so the marriage is kind of dire. But before we get into that specifically, we have to jump back in time to what I consider part of her true downfall, which is when she posed for the most iconic Ophelia painting by John Everett Millais. Elizabeth is in John Everett Millais' bathroom. There's a bathtub filled with freezing water because it's wintertime in London. She's dressed in an antique wedding dress, and she's awaiting further instruction. Lay on your back, Millais says. Raise your hands, palms up. Part your lips as if you're singing a farewell song. There are little oil lamps and candles scattered around the scene, but it's not enough to like efficiently heat the room that's freezing in the wintertime. And Millais is really deep in his artwork studies. He's painting from life. She's positioned in this bathtub. She's submerged in this heavy, wet wedding dress. And if you see the painting, she's like covered, like she's in the water. She's like
fully submerged.
Yeah. She is just kind of there in this freezing water, and then all the lights go out. And she is laying there until her lips are turning blue, until all of her limbs are completely numb, and she's not saying a word about it because this is like the Pre-Raphaelite fraternity guy. What's the leader of a frat? President?
The president.
He's the president of the Pre-Raphaelite frat, and she doesn't want to.
She's like, this is crazy that I'm even here. Yeah.
Yeah, because he could probably get any other model. So she wants to make a good impression. And so she's sitting there until she's like unconscious with cold.
Oh my God.
And
That's not good for your health.
No, and she's already sickly anyway.
Yeah.
She's already really sick. Millais doesn't realize until far later than he probably should have, especially if he's studying her. But he's locked the fuck in.
Yeah, he's locked in.
Yeah, he's locked in, and he doesn't realize until far too late. And she's alive, but she immediately gets like a crazy bad case of pneumonia. Her parents, again, are so furious.
They're like, oh, like, come on,
Yeah.
Lizzie.
But luckily, they're not mad at her so much as they're furious at Millais.
Reasonable.
Yeah, so they make Millais pay a hefty medical bill for her care and also for a prescription, her very first prescription to laudanum, which is a opiate like painkiller that she is addicted to for the rest of her life.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So keeping that in mind, when we blast forward again to her Dante's marriage, this could explain why she was often described as so sickly and a little bit unhinged. People often referred to her as having something called like neuralgia, which is just like head pain, and the germs of consumption, which are sort of just like Band-Aid terms that refer to like symptoms of drug addiction that we now know and recognize.
We now know they are that, yeah.
Yeah, but back then.
So she was addicted to opium, essentially.
Yeah, she was like addicted to this powerful painkiller.
Yes.
And yeah, it was Millais. It wasn't him who like.
He wasn't like, grr, take this. But
it wasn't intentional.
Right.
But it's just a crazy connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That definitely affected her well-being, I'm certain.
Yeah.
Her behavior.
Uh-huh. And it might explain, too, why Dante was probably hesitant for so many years to, like, tie the knot with her.
He was like, oh, what?
Yeah. He was never ecstatic about the idea of marriage, even,
Right.
like, when he proposed to her. It was mainly, like, a lot of his bros from the frat being like, oh, you should fucking lock it down. What are you doing? She's dying. Like, now's the time, you know? Like, that's what the vibe was.
That is verbatim their conversation.
End quote.
End quote.
He kind of just did it sort of like, okay, maybe
He's like,
it'll
I guess
work
a
out.
little marriage.
And, you know, as things do, they go on their honeymoon and she's pregnant. She gets pregnant real quick.
And she, in this sickly state?
In this sickly state.
Medicated, addicted.
Yeah, she's medicated. She ever since, like, the Millais painting, which was pretty early on in her, modeling career. That's a really great question. 1851. Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's
the
like 2 years in.
Ophelia painting is from 1851. So that was, like, pretty early on. And they get married in 1860. So it's, like, years of this.
So that has definitely deteriorated her health.
Yeah, for sure.
Most certainly.
Absolutely.
We know this now.
We know this now. Back then they definitely chalked it up to like her nature. Going back to being overwhelmed by one's nature and nature in general.
One's internal nature.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not her like intention. Like she didn't ask for it. It's not really in her control.
They're like,
But they didn't really look any deeper than she's being annoying right now.
They're like, oh, wow.
Yeah. It'd be easier for us just to like, ugh.
She's staring at the ceiling and counting backwards from 100 again, guys. Guys.
Fuck. So yeah, and it really didn't help. I mean, it never helps when you miscarry. Yeah. So she loses the baby. Some sources say that it was a miscarriage. Other sources say that it was a stillbirth.
That's so sad.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think, loops back to her state of well-being during this time. And this combined with her husband's increasing neglect towards her, he's definitely growing a little distant. He kind of is maybe regretful of their partnership. He starts stepping out again. He starts like sleeping with other people. She is reported as growing deranged, which like we'll talk about the word choices used to describe her at this time a little bit later because it changes throughout the years based on like how trendy feminism was. But she is definitely a little bit manic and a little bit delusional. She's like talking to people as if her baby's still alive. Like she's saying like, we have to keep it down because like the baby's in the other room. So she's like clearly very, very troubled and not doing well. Her story sadly ends with a drug overdose 2 years after her marriage to Dante that does take her life. So it's kind of depressing.
That is so sad.
Yeah. And it's so many situations and circumstances outside of her control that kind of led to this point.
Yeah.
And her story becomes legend. Because not only, well, when it was printed in the paper, it was very like, cool model, dies of an overdose, the end. But Dante's not about that under the radar shit. Mm-hmm. Dante, maybe even just subconsciously, I don't even know if he was doing it on purpose, but he was like, I need this to be a bigger fucking headline right now. He was anguishing over her death. He painted what some deem to be his most impressive and important painting called Dante's Dream on the Anniversary of the Death of Beatrice, which is like, it looks kind of like a corpse.
It does very much, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, but this is his goodbye painting to Elizabeth.
The fuck is Beatrice?
I don't know. It's like, there's a different
I'm
name.
not gonna...
There's a different name for it. It's like, Beata Beatrix, which I don't know. I guess that's the translation.
Probably.
But anyway,
less words, it seems.
Yeah. So he creates this goodbye work. People love it. And when she was buried, he has to be a little melodramatic.
Of course.
So she's buried, and he, as this great gesture of sacrifice, because he's so important, he buries this little book of his poetry with her. So he puts it in her coffin and they lower it down, they bury it. And it's a weird situation that I view almost like Poe's Telltale Heart, where like this book of poems in her coffin like tip taps on his brain. He suddenly feels like he's never made better poetry than the poems he buried with Elizabeth. Suddenly he feels like, oh, my collection is so small. How am I going to be a famous poet if I don't have those poems? Oh my God.
Oh,
yeah.
Does he?
Well, okay. So not only is he having like really, he's a little bit, he's tender.
Vulnerable. He's tender.
He's a little tender baby. That was a joke. He's a grown man. He is also leaning into a little bit of hypochondria. So he is convincing himself that his eyesight is failing, and he's drinking more and more, and he's like self-medicating, and he has this like real fear that he's going to lose his eyesight. And he is like telling his poor studio assistant, he's like, oh my God, my eyes. And his studio assistant was like, this is entirely psychosomatic. He just doesn't want to be responsible for his paintings anymore. He wants to like focus on poetry. So he's trying to make up excuses as why he can't paint anymore. So he's like, nah, So he's being a little bit dramatic. And this book of poems is like knocking on his brain every day for 7 years.
7 years. He's like, I need those.
He never like gets over it. Oh, and then he decides to go through with the help of his friend that he nicknames Owl for some reason. He decides to plan the exhumation of Elizabeth Siddal's corpse.
No fucking way.
Yeah, he like can't let it be. And he writes to his friend, he goes, I want to tell you something, lest you should hear it first from anyone else. It is that I have recovered my old book of poems. I hope you will think none the worse of my feeling for the memory of Gwen Elizabeth, for whom I know you had a true regard. The truth is that no one so much as herself would have approved of my doing this. Had it been possible to her, I should have found the book on my pillow the night she was buried. And could she have opened the grave, no other hand would have been needed.
He was like, guys, she wanted me to dig up her corpse.
Yeah, he was like, this is for her, honestly.
This is not for me.
I'm fine, but like I know that she would want me to do it. So then why
Guys,
would
she
you
actually
bury
told
it in
me.
the first place? Yeah.
He just needed to have an arc for himself.
Yeah,
he was like, I'm going to make this happen.
No, for sure. It was definitely like his own ego couldn't handle. Yeah. So he did get the poems back. He wasn't there at the exhumation.
Of course.
His friend Owl was Owl. His name's Howl, but they nicknamed him Owl.
That's kind of fire.
I know, I kind of like it. But I can only see him as a giant
I'm just picturing
owl.
A giant owl with a shovel in a cemetery.
Yeah. So Howl Owl he's present at the exhumation. And the legend, people love a morbid story because true crime enthusiasts have always been around. So when people heard about this, it was like crazy big story. People were like, I saw him there with the shovel like over her body. Like it turned into one of those where like the story got out of hand. And that's part of the reason why Elizabeth's entire story was like brought to legend so intensely, but he wasn't there. But Howl was, and Howl was basically Dante's like art agent in a sense. He helped sell his work and he was really buddies with him. And he was way too keen on digging up this corpse for some reason. He was like very passionate that this was going to happen. And he was also known as having, quote, a fatal gift for romanticizing and the inability to discriminate between fact and fiction. It was him who started a rumor that Elizabeth grew even more beautiful in death than she had been in life. He said that her hair grew more vibrant and red and kept growing after death to the point where it was filling the coffin with this beautiful, soft, long red hair.
What the fuck?
Yeah, and people like ate this up with a fork and knife. They like collectors of this time, and there was a rumor that like a strand of her hair came away with the notebook. And so collectors were like frothing at the mouth trying to like get
that
relic.
Book.
Yeah. But the notebook itself was sopping wet, covered in wormholes, like clearly subjected to 7 years
of decay with a corpse.
Yeah, exactly. So
like what?
Yeah. Dante also was, he always took the easy way out for his own conscience. So like he was like, or his own conscience. So he was like, oh, if you say so, awesome. She's beautiful, amazing. Of course, would expect nothing less from my bride,
He's like, yeah, that sounds that's accurate.
So her. That's so Lizzie.
Her. Yeah.
Of course.
Face beat. Like.
Face beat.
Extensions.
Boobs boobling. Boobs in the coffin. Oh my God. Yeah, so this was definitely like trying to make it easier on the general public so that they wouldn't have to like think about the reality of postmortem decay.
Of course.
Yeah, but it was like definitely a desecration of her legacy and her corpse and the gravesite for sure.
Why would he put that in there if he was going to go feral like that?
And it was pretty immediate. Like it was definitely like, I'm going to make this big grand gesture. Aren't I sacrificial and amazing?
Oh,
and then
so
the next
generous.
day he was like, shit.
He's like, my book.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into kind of the sickest part of the story.
We're not there.
Well, we've gotten to corpse desecration and like all that, but now we're going to get into the evil thinking of men.
I feel like that's been an undertone.
Well, it's going to become an overtone right about now. Buckle up, everybody. All right.
Put y'all seatbelt on.
Put your seatbelts on. So the sickest part, in my opinion, of this story is that she became more desirable in death than she had been in life. And we talked about this a little bit earlier when just like in regards to her being more beautiful when she was sick, or so people reported. In death, people didn't have to deal with the difficulties of her addiction, her personality, her wanting things for herself, her
needs and desires
needing
as a person.
Comfort from her husband, like simple human needs and wants that people would just prefer not to have to deal with. So with her being just a body.
They wanted her as an idea instead of as a person.
Exactly. So she became, like her death was immediately more meaningful than her entire life and life's work. She became just a shell, like a vessel for people's projections. And she was completely void of occupation and personality, which is just so sad.
That's so awful.
And it's not just her. Like going back to Ophelia imagery, unconscious imagery, death imagery, sleeping imagery of women, just in general, her, Elizabeth, and many other female bodies specifically that take on this like very placent, docile pose, they are portrayed and they grow into symbols of worship almost. They're very mysterious. They're alluring. They're inhuman almost. They take on this like divine feeling that put them inherently above regular living women who are just walking and talking like regular people. It's like the ideal woman is one that is not present in her body, but just, you know, a vessel. I'm going to be saying that word a lot, but that's what it is.
Inherently submissive in that she is not even in her own body.
Yeah, yeah. And this is not and they're gross about it too.
So gross.
Myra.
And
they're also gross about it.
And it's also vile.
And it's also vile because lots of men were fascinated by the idea of love that is consummated in death. So we've got there. And I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's disgusting. But there were definitely men and this idea in culture, just the idea that it's easier, the idea that it's more ideal, how like that rumor of her being more beautiful, like,
in death.
Oh, she's never been more beautiful. Can you, like, yeah, it's just this idea of like everything. It was so gross. It was so gross. And Dante's own brother, oh my God. Yeah, named William Rossetti, was one of these vile people. Nothing happened or anything, like physically. Okay. Nothing, as far as I know. You never know.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I was worried that we were getting to a point where we were like, oh, there was...
No, none of that happened, thank God. It was more like just the idea right. and conversation about it in culture that like normalized that idea.
Though, especially from his own brother.
Oh my God, yeah. And he was annoying. He was definitely an incel of the time. Like he loved the idealized version that he quickly created of Elizabeth after her death. In life, he was very adamant about her like being really ugly. Like he was not attracted to her. Don't even ask him about it. He hates her.
Me when I lie.
He was like, Dante, there was a story where Dante was going to paint this like viola portrait of like a beautiful, sensuous woman with like flowers, and she was sexy. And William was like, her head is not beautiful enough. And I was like, actually, it was quoted that she has a perfectly shaped head before. So
check your sources.
Yeah, for real. So, but William he was also very rude to her as well, like in as a
life,
person.
Yeah.
But I think that this like stems from resentment of both her and Dante because he was very attracted to her. On other occasions, he described her as a magnificently tall queen. And like he
said slay.
Yeah, like so he definitely harbored resentment like that stemmed from an attraction. And he was like very
envy
quick
for his brother.
Yeah, it was really awful. And so after she died, he was really happy. He was like, finally, she's not acting in ways that I deem unpleasant. Like, finally, she's not like existing in a world where I can't have her. So thank God for that.
Let's celebrate, he said.
Yeah. In his memoir, he wrote that on the second or third day after death, Lizzie looked still lovelier than before. So he's one of those.
Why does he have a memoir?
Yeah, also, why does he have a memoir?
Who is this man? What does he
publishing?
do?
Yeah.
How old is he? Is he older than Dante, younger than?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'm just so curious. I'm like, who the fuck?
Yeah, the article that I read was like very focused on like just his interpersonal relationships, but let's look it up. Mentat. Okay, so William is a year younger than Dante, so he has like younger brother syndrome. Yeah. So yeah, he had a fucking memoir for some reason. And he also, he was a poet as well as his brother. And he published a poem called Mrs. Holmes Gray, which was a lightly disguised self-insert story where a wife falls in love outside of her marriage and dies in the other man's arms. In this story, the wife dies from like a visitation of God So it was like a divine interference. Like her death was
divinely ordained, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or like,
yeah. William portrays it as this solution to all of his problems and grievances, where he's like, well, finally, like life is going my way.
I want justice for my good bitch, Lizzie.
Yeah. Well, there's also, okay, so there's another group of men that also love her down, but in not so gross of a way.
Thank God.
Might I introduce you to the gay cult of death that absolutely went crazy bananas for this story.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I have hope.
They're true crime enthusiasts
Oh my gosh.
from this time, and it was primarily this group comprised of gay men, considering Oscar Wilde and Arthur Symonds as two of the many famous names within the group. There's a theory why gay men might have been like so outspoken about love of true crime, and it's probably because they were already kind of living on the outskirts of what was deemed normal.
Yeah.
So they were sort of like, nothing could be worse than kissing a man. So like, might as well. Like people would
dabble.
prefer them to talk about this dead woman's body than like.
Then they're romantic.
Yeah. Oscar Wilde had this theory that like Dante murdered Elizabeth and put the fatal dose of laudanum in her hands. Like they were very quick to defend Lizzie. Like they were like, actually, she was mentally ill. Like that she didn't deserve any of that. Like they were kind of sticking up for her.
I love that.
Yeah. So they weren't in love with her body like other gross men were, but they were more invested in the story behind
her
it.
Story and her
yeah, and trying to like learn the facts. They were sleuths. They were trying to get to the truth of it. And there was another like reasoning that perhaps Elizabeth might have represented an unattainable, impossible, and prohibited love that gay men could maybe relate to at this time. So it's a little like kind of a mental stretch to like wrap my head around it, because it is like so weirdly morbid and kind of off kilter, but I do think that it's
something there.
It's weird. Yeah, it's kind of cool to talk about. As myths and legends tend to do, Elizabeth's story was like a bombshell when it first came out, and it quickly evolved over time and like changed with the trends. You know what I mean? We know the bare bones of the story.
Right.
They meet. She's discovered as a model. She gets addicted to drugs. She miscarries and she dies. So every story, like we can't tell definitively what happened every day or like the night of her death. Like we don't know. But throughout time, it's changed. And it's interesting to see what people came up with. In the late 1800s, so like soon after it happened, Lizzie kind of adopted this role of like romantic action heroine. Right? Where she was like this damsel, this soft, quiet, sickly dove who like could not think a thought for herself. And she kind of only existed as a quiet prop for the man's character development, for like Dante's character development. There's a great quote that describes her as a beautiful young girl who arouses and inspires the male hero, and in the warmth of whose love she blossoms. She is indeed the artist's greatest creation. Endowed with female frailty, however, she is too weak and sick to withstand the heat of the world she has entered, and instead of living happily ever after, declines towards death, becoming the very emblem of her lover's loss and regret.
It made her a trope.
Yeah, she became a trope. And old grumpy men at this time who hated the idea of a new woman, you know, like someone who did speak for herself, they would use this version of Elizabeth to like fight the feminist movement.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
So it was like Elizabeth versus Elizabeth.
Yeah, it's crazy. And
it's so crazy.
It's all like hypocrite. Like it's
all just like ideas of her instead of her as a real person.
So the idea of Lizzie in the 1920s and 30s is slightly different. It's a response to the idea that women could be sexual and also women could have a little bit more autonomy, like thinking for themselves, but it did not manifest in like a good way. It manifested in a very like misogynistic way, where when Lizzie used to be like this pliant, could do no wrong angel being, now she was hysterical. She was rolling around on the floor, completely out of her mind over the fact that Dante was having affairs, which is fair.
I mean, good for you, girl.
Yeah, but it's
they really just doubled down on those quote unquote deranged stereotypes, manic episodes. I feel like this is what happens when women have autonomy. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, do you want to be like her?
You
Look what happened to her.
Yeah.
But there's a reverse too.
Flip and flop.
Because there's always a polarized society where some people are gonna think badly of Lizzie and other people are gonna think badly of Dante. So the contrast to that at this time was Dante was the one who drove her to be so crazy. It's all his fault. He was the one who administered her fatal dose of laudanum. He's the one who made her so angry. He's the one who made them live in an unsanitary environment to the point where she lost her baby. That's another argument that people made too.
Wow.
Yeah, so people were either kind of team Lizzie or team Dante.
It's very polarized.
Yeah, and where before they were sort of Lizzie wasn't really part of it, but they were a weird team where it was Lizzie and Dante story together.
Right.
They come together to create the story. And now it's the mood of it totally changed. The idea of Dante at this time was he was cannibalizing the idea of Lizzie through his artwork in pursuit of his own fame.
It kind of sounds like he was a clout chaser. It seems
absolutely.
I wouldn't know if I'd go so far as to say that he was cannibalizing her narrative. But I think Bro had an agenda.
I mean, he definitely wasn't an attentive
partner.
Yeah. No, I feel like we've talked about doing an asshole measure at the end of each episode to see how shitty the artists are, because so many of these guys that we're going to be talking about are just the worst.
That's so true. Asshole meter for Dante, what do we think?
I'd give him I think he means well. I don't think he consciously was trying to make her life miserable.
Is the scale out of 10? Is that what we're doing?
I'm going to go out of 10. I'd give him, just compared to other artists too, compared to other people, I think I'm knocking him at a 5. I feel like most people are going to be a solid 5. He's not.
I think he's around a 5 as well. I was maybe thinking 6.
5 or 6.
Around there, between 4 and 6.
Yeah, because there was not, I didn't see any account of him being physically abusive or anything.
Or
he was just kind of neglectful and overall an asshole.
Shitty,
yeah.
Just a guy who cheats and is not a
scumbag.
Yeah, and there's many of those.
So many.
But there's artists who are way
evil.
Worse than that.
Literally evil.
Yeah, so he's, middle of the road, maybe even less so depending on the day.
Yeah, it depends. I think that he is kind of just an idiot in my brain. In my brain, he's I
think
he's kind of whiny.
Yeah, he does. He sounds a bit. I think the thing that puts him over brings him from 4 to 5, so to speak, is the digging up his dead wife's corpse.
Just that little thing.
A rotted book. Yeah, just that.
A rotted book of probably meh poems.
Probably mid best poems.
Dante.
I've never even heard of his poem. I've seen his art.
His poems, I
don't know much about poetry.
I don't consider myself educated enough to have an opinion on poetry.
His poetry,
just because I'm not. It's not that I'm not a fan, but I just haven't.
Yeah, but I would say generally I feel like he's more well known.
Yeah, he's
art,
definitely
right?
more well known for his art. I thought it was so funny that the studio assistant was he's a liar.
The studio assistant was this guy.
He was so fast to switch up. He was finally somebody fucking asked. In the 60s and 70s, can you guess how it changed a little bit for that time?
Are they
Yep. They're trippy groupie about it.
Oh, they're
They're trippy groupie loopy about it. The narrative focuses on a haze of drug addiction and groupie culture. So they focus in.
That's our girl.
Yeah, they focus in on kind of romanticizing her drug addiction for sure. She in this case is kind of just a happy fangirl.
She's a groupie,
yeah. And there's comparisons of Lizzie to Marilyn Monroe, this glamorized superstar of the time, died when she was young, and so she couldn't fall victim to like her own aging and like that kind of glamorized Hollywood starlet tragedy that became the narrative.
Like for her, for Lizzie. Interesting.
Yeah, and it was definitely romanticized.
Very different in such a short span of time, how fast her story is changing.
Yeah, so, and we're still seeing it. Like, I think nowadays, since the 80s, there was we all woke up collectively in the 80s and we're like, wait a minute, maybe she was just a person.
Everyone was like, oh my God, she's
just a girl.
She's just a girl.
So in the 80s, with a bunch of writings from Jan Marsh, who is one of my sources, she kind of took it upon herself to like rewrite the narrative through the lens of actually trying to learn more about Lizzie's life, as separate as she could be from Dante. Still to this day, we're trying to like figure out the best way that we can understand Lizzie. And I think probably the most important aspect or items that we can look back on are her drawings and paintings, because it gives us a little insight into how she thought about the world and how she interpreted story. And
very much so. Very serpentine in the way that she's perceived. Like, that's crazy, all the different things that were projected onto her.
Yeah, and like so much of her story weirdly happened after she was gone. So that is the story of Elizabeth Siddal, the Pre-Raphaelite muse.
Wonderful. I've learned so much. I literally did not know any of this.
Isn't that okay, isn't the bathtub story fucking crazy?
I'm also gagged by that.
Because it made, like, when you look at the painting now,
I'm like, she's freezing cold.
She's freezing to death. Yeah, like it's...
And then it's ironic how lush the landscape is around her as well.
Her face and expression, this sort of vacant, she's alive and she's in there, but it's still corpse-like.
It's very corpse-like, yeah.
Yeah, it's just so interesting how even before the legend of her death came to be, there are all these like weird moments in art history that foreshadow like what her story was gonna turn
out, yeah.
So yeah, it's really wild.
I thought of, when I looked at this, when we were talking earlier about ways that it has been like resurfaced. Do you remember when girls used to do those bathtub photo shoots with milky water and flowers?
Pinterest.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. That's probably not, like, I don't think that the Pinterest girlies had Ophelia in their mind, or maybe they did. But I just think it's funny the way that these things materialize.
Oh, totally. No, absolutely. Like it's in photo shoots. It's in like, every time I see a swamp pond, I'm like, I'm gonna get in.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in.
You should get in.
Locked in.
We should do a photo shoot in a swamp, in antique gowns.
Oh my God.
But not cold.
The antique wedding gown, too.
It's stunning.
I keep noticing more and more details the longer I stare at this.
Oh, I know.
It's just so...
I wish I could see it in person. Where is it?
Oh, it's at the Tate. We should go there.
We should.
We should do field trips when we're rich and famous.
I think we should. We should travel the world.
I think that we're going to do that if we have enough monies in the bank. We'll do...
As soon as we have...
$1.
$1 from this pod. I don't know how podcasts make money. We'll find out, though.
What ad sponsors will we get? Like, it's weird. Like, I'll get all these spam emails from people who clearly don't know what I post about, but they pretend that they do.
And they're like,
we love your content. It's perfect for us. And it's like dog food. And I'm like, I would promote this if I had a dog or if my account had anything to do
with dogs. Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Don't drown in your bathtub.
Don't be cold in there.
Put on more than like 3 candles when you take a bath.
Take off your antique wedding gown.
Stop. I don't want to see any more antique wedding gowns in the bath, okay?
No more.
We've had to talk to you about this a lot recently.
It's getting out of hand.
And, you know,
quite frankly,
your mother and I are disappointed. So
it's us. We're your mothers.